Right, so if you've watched my earlier videos, you'll know that I had a ton of fun with the UK or the US 65, which is a little Earsheen 1S whoop, and I decided to give it my son for part of his Christmas present. So it's been packed away, and I only really flew it for half a dozen packs, and then packed it away before I wrecked it. So I decided to get this, which is the Happymodel Mobula 7, and the reason why I decided to get this is because Norfolk FPV, who I sometimes fly with, have gone a bit whoop crazy at the moment, and on the 19th of November there's basically a whoop evening where we're all going to go to a local hobby shop, and the hobby shop's basically given us the right to fly around all evening, drink beer, eat pizza, and just have a laugh. So I really wanted one of these little guys for myself. So I went for the Mobula for a few reasons, really. One, I wanted to try something different than the Earsheen one. I think I kind of like to explore different things and try different things. So rather than just getting the same model, I've gone for a different one. And as you can see, like the Earsheen one, we've got a little brushless whoop. This one I believe is 75mm, and this one comes with, because this is the cheap version, comes with a little USB charger. You can get it with a proper charger if you get the more advanced version. Get a bag of spare props, a prop tool and a screwdriver. This one came with a couple of bags of free props, although I don't think that's normal. And you get 4 batteries. And the way that this little guy works is you can use it on 1 or 2S. And essentially, you've got 2 batteries which just go into this 3D printed mount. And if you're just using a 1S battery, you would simply remove that and stick your 1S through there. Or actually no, maybe you'd leave it in. And anyway, the connector on it is essentially 2 of these plugs. So you plug one battery in here, the other battery in here, so essentially you're running 2 1-cell batteries in series, which I guess is a great idea if you've got lots of these little 1-cell batteries. I mean, what's this? This is 250 mAh high voltage 4.35 30 to 60C cell. Now, because I don't have millions of these sort of batteries lying around, I think sooner rather than later what I'll do is simply remove this lead and put some sort of JST connector or possibly even an XD30 and just do a bit of jerry-rigging to fit a normal 2S LiPo on the bottom. I don't know if I can be bothered sort of faffing around plugging 2 batteries in every time. But the fact that this can run on 1 or 2S should mean that it's got a fair bit of poke if you fancy flying outdoors. And because I'm in the UK, this is the EU version. So you can buy this in a few versions. The US version comes with a built-in Spi Receiver. If you're in the EU, there isn't an LBT version of the flight controller, so the version you will get comes with a full-sized XM Plus, which are the 2 antennas you can see sticking out. So I'd imagine that this will have a lot more range than the SPI version, which I think is a single antenna rather than a diversity antenna. The downside is obviously you've got these big antennas hanging around. It's probably a little bit heavier, although the XM only weighs a couple of grams. But probably more importantly, I think this little guy only has 1 spare UART on it, the flight controller, and that spare UART is being taken up by the FrSky XM Plus. So you'll probably I'm not sure if this guy has smart audio. I think it does, but not if you get this version because Smart Audio needs that spare UART, which of course the XM Plus has stolen. But yeah, I mean, other than that, you can see we've got an adjustable camera mount on the front, which is pretty nifty, and it's really, really light, although like most of these things feels a little bit flimsy. I mean, this stuff feels quite flexible as opposed to stiff and crackable. The actual canopy feels pretty weak. So this part of the video is shot 3 or 4 days later than the original part. And the reason for that is during the initial test flight, when I was whizzing around my street in the dark, as you can see, the camera was pretty poor in the dark, and I had a full speed crash into a wall, which took basically a huge chunk out of this duct, and I've bodged it together with Gorilla Glue, which was the only thing that I had to hand which would secure it. And since then I've had a little bit of jello in the feed. I have got a new frame on the way, and I'll put links into the description below. But I've been sort of flying this guy around a little bit, both indoors and outdoors. I took it with me the other day when I went freestyle flying with my 6-inch. I'm kind of in a better place to talk about its pros and cons than I was before. And I kind of want to start off this by saying, if you bought the UK65 or a 1S Whoop, don't feel that you need to run out and pick one of these guys up, because it's quite a difficult quad to sort of understand. On the face of it, the 2S sounds amazing, and it's certainly got a lot more power than the UK65 and other 1S quads I've flown. You know, you can do rolls, you can do inverted stuff, and you've got a little bit more power to pull out of them than you had on the UK65. In terms of outright speed, there's not a huge amount in it, simply because with the camera angles that you've got on this little guy, you can't really run enough camera angle to really use its full speed. There are a number of downsides, I think, to 2S. The first is really weight. Even using a couple of these things, which are really, really light, you are obviously adding some weight onto the quad. And I think the design of these quads, and certainly this one, where you run 2 1S batteries in series using one of these guys, I think is a pretty, in this instance, pretty flawed design. It does work really well in terms of performance, but these connectors, and this applies to most tiny whoops, these connectors are rubbish. As soon as you put the batteries on, you'll notice that you'll get immediate sag down to sort of 3 and a bit volts, and that's not the batteries being rubbish, that's these connectors putting in a huge amount of additional resistance, so they actually reduce your flight time quite a bit. So the first thing that I did is removed this connector and attached just a normal JST connector to it, which basically meant that the voltage drop was a lot smoother. The batteries I've been flying mine on are much too big for this particular quad. I had some of these 500 2S, oh sorry, should I say 460 2S cells knocking around, but these weigh about 31 grams, which is more than double what 2 of these weighed. But even using these, the performance is still more than adequate for indoor use, and when you, because of the additional weight, it actually makes 2S indoor feasible. Whereas if you're running 2S with these guys indoor, even using tons of throttle expo, etc., it's really difficult to control indoors, simply because of the amount of punch and speed that it's got. So moving forward, as I said, I've put on the JST connector. I've got some smaller nanotechs coming, which I think are 300 more or 350 more, which are about 10 grams lighter than this, and that's the way I'm going to run mine, because these things to me are just light but pretty rubbish. You can get 2S 300 more, I think, lipos from Beta FPV, which are pretty light, but they're sort of the best part of £9 each, and I can get sort of 4 of those in the same more for, you know, the same price, and these are probably better batteries as well. So let's talk about this. The first criticism of this quad is the camera is awful. There's no two ways around it. It's awful at night, it's awful when it's bright, it's awful when it's dim. I haven't really found a condition when it's any good. It's a lot worse than the camera which was on the Eachine UK65. The VTX is okay, but obviously it's only 25 milliwatt like most of these are, and if you've got a 2S quad that's got quite a lot of punch and is capable of flying outdoors, you soon run into the limits of that 25. You know, it's fine in a clear open area, you can go quite a distance, but as soon as you go behind a wall or behind a tree, your video goes pretty quickly. The frame itself, obviously mine broke on its, I don't know, second or third battery, but it was a heck of an impact. I think with any of these little guys, you need to see the frames really as disposable. Replacement frames for this guy are about £3, so it's not the end of the world. And because everything is clipped together, there's no soldering to do to transport these components elsewhere. It has got a built-in buzzer, which is pretty loud, which is nice. The FI Sky XM Plus is obviously adding another 3 grams or so in weight to it, but it gives you a hell of a range if that's of interest to you, far more than the little SPI receiver that is built in. Speaking about the built-in receiver, this is the same board as the SPI version, so it has got the built-in receiver. I read that they were coming with the FlySky version, but my one has got FR on the bottom of it, which I'm guessing stands for Free Sky, although I don't know for sure. So I'm guessing if I wanted to, I could just take out the XM Plus and run this on SPI if I was running FCC firmware. But my verdict on this, guys, it's a ton of fun. It's got bags of punch. It's fun outdoors, but the problem with it is, why would you use something like this outdoors when you could be using, you know, something that's much more powerful, you know, a 2 or a 3 inch quad with a carbon frame that's going to be more robust. So unless you've got, you know, a pretty big back garden, you're not really going to be using this outdoors very often. You can use it outdoors and it flies pretty well, but it doesn't fly anywhere close to as good as, you know, a 3 inch with 1407s, or even a 2 inch, the Diaton GT series 2 inch ones, which fly really well outside. And that kind of leaves you with a quad which is really fun to fly and has tons of power, but really has too much power for indoors. So unless you're running, you know, a whacking great heavy 2S battery, you're going to struggle to control it. The other thing that I've got on the way is, I think, a 450 or a 500 mAh 1S battery, which is pretty light, and I'm probably going to try running this on 1S indoors. So if you've got a UK65 or similar, don't rush out and buy this. There's no real huge benefit. You know, you can do acro with it. It does have more power to pull out of dives, etc. But really, other than the novelty factor, these quads are meant to be flown indoors. And you know, the UK65 has got more than enough speed to do that. I think the one benefit that having 2S and more powerful setup does do is it means that you can run much bigger batteries, and I suspect on 1S cells where we're talking a lot lighter weights, you could put a pretty big battery on it and get pretty huge flight times. I mean, running this on 2S, even mooching around outside, I was getting 3 to 4 minutes, so inside I would probably be getting closer to 5 or 6 minutes. With a 1S, although obviously you've got one less cell, the fact that it's, you know, 10-15 grams lighter probably means you'd end up with a pretty long flight time. So all in all, I'm pretty chuffed with it. I hate the camera. The frame's pretty fragile but cheap, and I think most of these things will break pretty easily. The rest of it has been absolutely fine. I mean, the board itself is just an updated version apparently of the one that's in the UK 65. The motors are pretty sweet, although I don't know how long they'll last, and there's nothing really else about it. But the only thing I would say is just get rid of this silly connector, unless you've got a ton of these batteries lying around, in which case, you know, knock yourself out. It might even be worthwhile looking at putting, you know, a proper JST connector or something on either of these, and at least you won't get that huge sag. So yeah, so I'm kind of glad I've got it, but in terms of its all-out speed and performance and flying outdoors, there aren't many occasions where I'd rather, you know, be running this than a much bigger quad, or, you know, doing the similar sort of stuff with a 1S quad. So yeah, so I don't think it's the hype train that lots of channels are making out. I wish it had a better camera. I wish the VTX was 200 milliwatts, so that's probably the first thing I'd look to change, get a better camera with hopefully a built-in VTX that outputs 200. But that's about it. I mean, I've got a couple of mates who have got the beta FPV quads, and they've had both guys who bought them, and they're pretty expensive, have had issues with theirs. The first guy, his kept resetting every time he had a crash, which came down to faulty wiring, I think. And the second guy had a motor issue where there was actually a very small washer inside the motor. So, you know, I think you need to see these things as pretty disposable, you know, and on that basis, you know, spending 60 quid or 70 quid or whatever this was is probably the max that I would want to pay for something that's really just for, you know, shits and giggles and having a laugh. And as I said, just remember that the jello is simple because the bodge job that I've done on this is impacting the blades a little bit as they spin round and causing it to be a little bit unstable. It's running, in the videos, it's basically just running my normal rates. There's nothing special. The bed in my back garden was on angle mode, but the rest of it is on acro mode. And from here on inwards, I'm just going to look at Project Mockingbird and read up a little bit and see if I can get this guy flying a little bit better in angle mode, ready for my fun night out racing. If you like it, you can get it from Banggood. I didn't actually get this from Banggood. I got it from another site which I can't even pronounce, but I'll put the link below. They did have stock. It was cheaper than Banggood, and it took about 3 weeks to arrive, so feel free to check those out as well. Any questions, give me a shout. Cheers, bye bye.